So here again, I'm picking up part two. So after Peter Kraft sees his wife Elsa and excuse me, his wife Linda, and this is Elsa having a conversation. You see Elsa a little upset because Linda's confronting and telling her that you really don't know who my husband is, and she basically is telling her to get lost. You're not going to start moving in on my family. And of course, Elsa, playing the damsel, is looking a little like this upset, but underneath that, you got to remember she's that devil. She's a devil woman. She's Magda, and so this is Linda, Dr. Kraft's second wife, and at this point, she's confronting Elsa and telling her, "Why don't you ask about your other family?" And it's presumably, if you remember from the first episode review, Dr. Kraft is a Nazi operative. It's implicated, or it's suggested, I should say, that he was in World War One. He, based on his age and his keeps referencing war throughout this series. So I have a feeling that he did some unscrupulous things during World War One. So while this is going on, this all has it's supposed to be a child's birthday party, but again, Dr. Kraft makes it a reason to have his Nazi meetings in the courtyard there and in the gazebo. Now, the irony of this scene here is that basically you have all these Nazi sympathizers and operatives at this party, but yet they have a piñata. Now, for those of you who don't know, obviously that's filled with candy. You kind of hit that poor paper mache animal until it breaks open and all the candy comes out. Um, but that's the thing about these type of people. They hate minorities. They hate ethnic people, but they celebrate, you know, their parties and their food, utilizing bits and pieces of their own culture. Here you go, them hating the Latino culture and trying to get rid of them in Los Angeles. But there you go. It's okay for them to basically celebrate using party favors that were Mexican party favors. So later on in the scene, we see Dr. Kraft confront Elsa, basically trying to find out what they were talking about. And after another romp in the sack, he convinces her to let her demon seed, fictional son, her made up son, that's kind of part of her evil lair, sleep over with Tommy and his friends. And here you see, as typical kids do, about to tell ghost stories when none other than the demon seed's make believe kid steps in. So here you have that evil kid called Frank telling his ghost story, and it actually uh, was actually telling them that this is actually a true story and gave extreme detail about this case that happened several years ago, obviously way before he was born. And being that he's a demon seed and the devil child, he probably was involved with that murder. So evidently, this turns out to give the kids nightmares. And of course, Tommy, who's Peter Kraft's son, who's already leery about Frank, this kid here is that you're looking at. And Frank knows that. And so Frank is trying to scare the HE double hockey sticks out of him. And this is what Frank turns into to scare young Tommy. Boo. And that's what he turns into, a legless, limbless little girl with the eyes pinned open. And that's one of the creep factors in Penny Dreadful City of Angels. So moving on from the macabre to the somber, here you see Officer Riley, who actually didn't learn his lesson after Detective Vega confronted him about beating up uh, innocent youth who happened to be of Mexican American descent. Now, at this point, Officer Riley doesn't know that Mateo is Detective Vega's brother. But again, he's trying to find a gullible and a kid that's fearful and that would confess to these crimes. So he starts to harass not only Mateo, which you see to your left, but his sister, who is Josefina. So after basically accusing him of spray painting buildings, which obviously they weren't, they were getting groceries for his mother. You see the other cop throwing out his groceries and trying to intimidate him, and eventually trying to persuade him to confess of crimes that he didn't commit. So after Mateo continues to stand up to the cop, and after being throwing insults at Mateo, like I said, these racist cops, anybody of color, he called them monkeys, spicks, wetbacks, whatever you want to call them. And Mateo stands his ground as he starts to continue to harass him. Officer Riley then turns his harassment towards his younger sister and slams her against the fence and starts to molest her. He starts filling her up, telling her, I know you're hiding something, you're hiding weapons. Officer Riley proceeds to violate and molest Josefina as Mateo is pinned down by two officers as he's screaming for them to stop. And you hear Josefina crying, and you can see the anger and the violation in her face. And of course, no arrests were made as you see Mateo just as distraught as his sister. Looking for comfort and counseling, Josefina sees a flyer in the neighborhood for Sister Molly. And later on, you see in the series, she meets Sister Molly, and they have this sympathetic exchange, as you will. But that's less compelling than what we're about to see now, at least in my point of view. Let me just say before I move on, it was an extraordinary performance by Jessica Garza. And as I see, I know that I'm going to do part 3 of episode 4 review in a couple minutes, but I just want to preview episode 3 with this. That's right. If you know that heavyset gentleman is Councilman Townsend, who in previous reviews of episode 3 has the sexual proclivities, and obviously you know what those proclivities are now. What's interesting about the person that he's kissing is the Gestapo, the Nazi Gestapo driver, who turns out to be an American. And we'll pick it up in episode 3 of the review of Penny Dreadful City of Angels, episode 4.